All right. Well, hello and welcome to the Virtually Agile Meetup. I'm your host here today, Fred Deichler. And today we're excited to be hosting Prateek Singh, talk about Ford's frameworks and Toyota's theories. Some of you are familiar, some might be our first time here at the Virtually Agile Meetup. So I want to walk through this platform that we're on called Butter. Butter is a sponsor of the Virtually Agile Meetup. We'll give a short introduction. As you see here, it's all in one platform. That's a great thing about Butter. Whether it's with Miro or the screen sharing, there's so many things built in. What we have here first on the left side of the screen, you should see reaction button. React. It's a face. You can do some reaction. You can try those out. Be sure you do that when Prateek is talking. Additionally, we have a queuing system. You can say, I have a comment, I have a question, I have an idea. On the left side, you can hit Q, so you can go ahead and do raise a hand, raise a comment, whatever, and I will call on you. There's also a chat feature, so you can say hello in the chat. You can ask questions here. Maybe you're in a spot where you can't unmute. Feel free to ask questions here. I'll be sure I route those over to Prateek. The chats are also threaded and emojis, so please be interactive in chat. You can also take notes for yourself that are saved and sent to you personally under the Notes tab. Take your own notes privately in Butter, so if you want to take notes while Prateek is talking so you can have a memory, this is a great way to do this. You can use keyboard shortcuts to mute and unmute. Also for your video, so M for mute and unmute, V for video. So if you're ready to get started, why don't you go ahead, click on the screen under the and stamp us with a thumbs up or thumbs down. Excellent. Additionally, at the end, there is a soundboard that I'll turn on, which those of you know has some great sounds like this, or this. Excellent. So all right. So it's my pleasure now to introduce to you Prateek Singh. Prateek has been leading and working at Agile teams for almost 2 decades. He started with XP, then Scrum, and now works with Kanban system. He's gained a breadth and depth of knowledge regarding Agile techniques, practices, and implementation principles. He's played the role of a software engineer, Scrum Master, Agile coach, manager of software engineering, director of engineering, director of business agility in his career, so many different titles. And he's currently the head of learning and development. That's something you might have heard of, prokanban.org. And he's also an independent consultant. And if you weren't aware, if you see in his background, there's a bottle of whiskey because he's also the co-host of the Drunk Agile podcast. I first met Prateek kind of through the Drunk Agile podcast, I think. And it was me sending him messages on LinkedIn saying that the audio is blowing my ears out at the beginning. And he fixed it. And then later on, it was at the end. But I'm so happy to be welcoming Prateek here to the stage for his talk. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Yeah, and perfect use of customer feedback. He said direct customer feedback. We were able to utilize it. Thank you. First of all, thanks to everyone who's attending and a bunch of familiar faces I've seen before. So great to see all of you. Again, and even some names that I see are familiar here. Let's jump right into it. This is I'm hoping this won't be a huge long talk. Probably 25 minutes or so. Hopefully not longer than that. And it'll give us an opportunity to have some discussion here. In fact, I'd rather we have the discussion than just me talk here. So please feel free to interrupt me at any point of time or put questions, comments in the queue. I can take a pause and answer those. I'm sure Fred will stop me if there's one sitting there for a while. This is Ford Frameworks and Toyota's Theories. Fred already introduced me. Thank you for that. I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself. The most relevant piece of information for this talk, though, is post-pandemic. We are a one-car family. My family, we have just one car, and it is a Ford Explorer. I want to get all the disclaimers out of the way first. So we're talking about Ford and Toyota, but Just FYI, that's the one car that we have at this point. Um, so talking about Ford, that's Henry Ford. I'm sure most of you are aware of who this person is or was. Some very controversial and almost inappropriate views that he had. We're going to leave those to the side. We're not going to talk about those. We're going to talk about his contribution to the industry. It was an it, as a business magnate, as a business tycoon. Um, he did something very interesting. He actually changed what used to be a bespoke industry, which was car manufacturing. You literally would go to a car manufacturer and say, "Build me a car," and they will build a car for you. He changed that industry to a manufacturing line. He introduced the manufacturing line and started making cars which anyone could at least could buy and drive. Um, that obviously Ford made a lot of money based on that, and as a consequence, till today, Ford Motors exists. Um, just a quick timeline on what how he went about this. 1903 is when he founded it. He created the Model T was the big seller there in 1908, and by 1916 he was selling 600,000 of these cars per year, which is quite impressive that in 8 years they were able to ramp up production that much. Um, you can see he did a few things that were pretty pretty out of the ordinary for that time. But there was something he did in 1927, which is going to be the crux of our conversation today. Um, and we'll get to that in a bit. Does anyone got any idea what that might have been? That this is what I'm talking about from 1927. What what he might have done after producing that 15 millionth Model T? Any ideas? Color, not just black. Yeah, that's a good one. It's a famous quote of they can have any color they want as long as it's black. Yeah, it wasn't that, but yes, Andy and Maru, you're absolutely right. It is this buying of this town in in this middle of Brazil called Fordlandia. Um, yeah, he bought a factory town right in the middle of Brazil, this huge tract of land to set up a rubber plantation and a rubber factory. And we'll talk about a little more in detail about Fordlandia in a bit. Let's talk about what led up to Fordlandia. Um, in this first part of uh, uh, of the career of Ford, saw a lot of growth. The assembly line was the big invention that spurred this growth. The other part here was something he did for his workers. The $5 a day wage that he started paying his auto workers was actually double the rate that was being paid across the industry before that. He also instituted the 8-hour workday. As much as we might like or hate the 8-hour workday, back then an 8-hour workday was an improvement on what people were asked to do at that point of time. Um, and even though he was paying people double what other people were paying, his assembly line and his process improvements actually were able to drop the price of this car in half, even though he was paying people more for it. There were some major improvements. One of the reasons for that improvement was he had a vertically integrated production line. He had actually figured out, instead of contracting out to different people for different bits, he figured out how to vertically integrate it. We'll talk a bit more about that as well. Um, what he had done, and I'm specifically centering in on the work he did for his employees. He created a framework that helped him make sure his employees stayed with him. His employees had the right working conditions, and created this this machine that just kept churning out regularly. He created the assembly line. He doubled the wages, more than doubled the wages. He reduced working hours from 9 to 8, and then instead of 6 days to 5. And he he embarked on this program of what he called a sociological department. He started a program within his company to improve the personal standards and living conditions, including things like a moral standing, which just code for prohibition. Like they actually he was his sociological department was focused on improving these things for his workers. Um, this is the framework that worked for him really well. He took all of these elements, applied them, and it worked for him pretty well in the in the heart of Michigan. He was able to actually get pretty great returns from it, as we all know. Um, let's go back to Fordlandia. Just as just as an as I was saying earlier, because Ford wanted to vertically integrate his industry, the thing that he did not have control over was production of tires. Um, he goes to the British controlled the rubber supply, and the plants, the rubber plants, the rubber trees that were native to Brazil were being grown across Asia at this point. And Ford wanted to control his own destiny. So he thinks the easiest way to do this is, let's go out there, buy this rubber plantation, buy this big tract of land in Brazil where things grow well, and let's grow our own rubber. Let's just go and let's go and start doing that. So what he did was he leased this land from the Brazilian government. It was in the heart of the Amazon, and about 2.5 million acres. That is larger than Yellowstone National Park. That is how big this tract of land was. It was larger than Yellowstone National Park, for those of you who have ever been there and have an idea of how big that is. Fordlandia was this dream of Ford to cross integrate. In fact, it wasn't just the fact that he wanted to bring all this rubber in and build those tires. He wanted to do things for the people as well. He wanted to not just get his people to Brazil to manage these plants. He wanted to help train Brazilians so that they will work hard and do all the things that he had people in Dearborn, Michigan doing. This itself lends to some interesting things, because Ford considers this more than just a plantation. This framework that he had developed back in Dearborn, back in Michigan, he takes this framework, this exact thing, and does a lift and shift and moves it to Brazil. He takes this exact, all of these individual bullet points, he takes these, lifts and shifts, and drops them in Brazil. In fact, it kind of, if you all don't know the story of this, there are some great books written on this. It actually leads to some very interesting things. Excuse me. Does the assembly line, the space between machines and assembly lines is usually brought together to minimize waste. They did that. They planted trees together. They doubled the wages. They did the 8-hour work weeks. All of this stuff. In fact, he went even further. He did all that moral standing stuff, all the sociological department stuff. He actually did all those things in Brazil. built American style housing. There was a school, a cafeteria, all of this stuff. In fact, there was even there was a church and even line dancing for the local Brazilians to come in. Yeah, exactly, line dancing. That's the part that gets me. Like, why? But whatever works, I guess. Um, Turns out, what this by the way, these are actual pictures from Fordlandia from back in the day. These are in the heart of Brazil. He actually built these houses and these churches that look like they've been taken directly from Midwest America in the early 1900s and transferred over to Brazil. That's exactly what he did. He picked up what was happening in Dearborn and moved it to Fordlandia. Um, how do you all think that went? what do you what do you think was the result of this lift and shift of taking this a very nicely working framework and applying it over flat tire? I love that, Andy. Yeah, flat tire. Yeah, as Christina says, yeah, terrible. Different people know your user. Exactly. It's not hard to predict what happened. Um, there was there was absolutely a culture clash, as Mark is saying. It was absolutely it they the workers hated it. The, it's if the same 8-hour workday that sounded like a good idea in Dearborn was a horrible idea in Fordlandia, because you're in the middle of the Amazon rainforest with all the heat and humidity in the world. Working for 8 hours does not work. Um, there was a full scale riot actually at some point, and the Brazilian army had to step in to protect the managers uh, that had been that had been brought in by Ford to help run this framework. The land itself that he bought, he got a little duped on it. Ford had actually never visited Fordlandia. He had just bought it from far away, and he actually got duped on the kind of land that the Brazilian government sold him to. In fact, the Ford Motor Company eventually in 1945 sold all this stuff back to the Brazilian government, a loss of $20 million at that point of time. This is at that point of time, and yeah, Maru, you were a little ahead of me on this. Yes, yeah, and he had actually tried to build another town a little further away from Fordlandia called Balterra, which had a little better fertility on the land, and that didn't work either. So he sold both of these back. And Henry Ford himself never visited these towns. He never actually visited these towns. But his yeah, Christina did the math for us there. Yeah, that's a lot of money to lose at that point of time. At the same time, around the time when all this was happening, folks from Toyota actually visited Ford's plants in the U.S. Ford was producing 8,000 cars per day compared to Toyota's 2,500. So it's folks in Toyota obviously thought that there was something they could learn from Ford. Um, the the internet did the math. Yeah, so they came out to visit the plants and see what they could learn. In fact, of a lot of the learnings that Taichi Ono had at that point were because of because of the the trip that he made to the US. They weren't really from Ford's production system. They were from visiting the supermarkets, but a lot of the learnings we had were from that trip, and that's where they actually started their journey to the creation of the Toyota production system. Um, there's a very interesting distinction between Ford's framework and the theories behind Toyota's production system. Um, Toyota's production, there is just there's absolutely no established lean framework. You might hear a lot of things around lean, but as defined by Toyota Production System, there isn't really an established lean framework. There are lean principles that you apply in your context to have to accomplish a lean transformation, but there isn't a framework. Do this 6 points and or these 20 things in this order and do this. Um, that's where that's where Toyota comes from. In fact, a great book, if you want to read more and more about this, is The Machine That Changed the World. It's a great description of how both actually initially he talks about Ford, and then later most of the book talks about Toyota. They talk about Toyota, and they list out these principles. These are just the things you need to do, and these, in fact, they're better represented as this graphic. You identify how value is created, you map the value stream, you create flow, you establish a pull system, and then you keep improving this. You keep improving this, and it's a cycle that you keep going down. It's the lean circle that you keep following. There isn't a direct, hey, do these 20 things and you will have a transformation. It's a continuous pursuit of perfection. In fact, that's where, and some of you are already on to this with me. For me, the essence of Agile is lean. That lean circle that I just showed you, that for me is the essence of Agile. I don't need to necessarily ask this question because you all have been answering this in the chat already, for those of you who have been keeping up with the chat. But, the one of the reasons Fordlandia failed was because Ford had a recipe. This is the way I do it. This is the recipe I have. And regardless of context, culture, people, whatever it is, the recipe needs to be implemented. The framework was essentially applied as prescribed without flexibility for what was happening on the ground. This is Greg Grandin wrote the book on Fordlandia. Literally wrote the book of Fordlandia. This is his interview with NPR, and he says the first failure was social. That was the very first failure when this framework was picked up and applied. The social context was not taken into account. My favorite part of this is not one drop of latex from Fordlandia ever made it into a Ford car. That's just awesome. That for me is just summarizes how big of a failure this lift and shift transformation was. The recipes are great when you're planning your Thanksgiving dinner and all that stuff, but they're not necessarily great for change. Anytime you have a large prescriptive framework that you're going to lift and shift, they do carry large risks. The bigger the implementation, the bigger the risk is going to be. This is one of the reasons I believe Agile transformation fail is because we get stuck with the recipe rather than the mindset. We get stuck with the recipe of this is what we're trying to do, instead of, hey, we're trying to get leaner and we're trying to get better at delivering things, get better at understanding what value is and seeking perfection towards that value. We don't approach these incrementally. We approach these as lift and shift. We don't do Agile transformations in an Agile manner. That is one of the reasons why Agile transformations fail. In fact, this is a Prateek thing. This is not a general thing. This is the best approach to implementing Agile is Agile. If you want to implement these Agile things, implement them in an Agile manner. Don't just say, hey, go do these things and thou shalt become Agile. Agile's about discovering what works well in our context, not knowing what works well. Many a time we approach these things as this is exactly what we're going to work. and and if you all just do this, we'll be great. Uh, Instead, it's, hey, these are some basic principles. How do we apply them in your context? There's a great question there. If every company still has a Ford, how are we ever going to be truly agile? I don't know. Christina, that's a great question, and the question there is, can we get everyone, can we get people to buy into uh, quote unquote transformation as a journey instead of we're one and done. We're done right at that moment. How do we move forward with that? Yep. Let's figure out what works best instead of just know ahead of time what works best. Um, this is not a recipe. This lean circle thing is not a recipe, and uh, even more, it is not easy. Um, this is probably one of the hardest thing to pursue over a course of time. Um, what the reason it's not easy is because it is asking you to break the rules in the pursuit of flow, value, and perfection, not follow any rules. What this is saying is, as things come up that interrupt the flow of value to customers, get that out of your way. Not necessarily, hey, here are the rules. If you just follow them, it will happen. Um, if your implementation, if your transformation has a roadmap, you have probably already gone wrong. That's just a small jibe. I'm going to move off of that real quick. Uh, this applies to all implementations. It's we value the things on the left more than the things on the right. We want to eliminate waste, not add processes. In fact, that's my favorite way of affecting agile transformations, or transformation in general, is via negativa. I prefer making progress. We should prefer making progress by removing stuff from your process, not adding things to your process. Via negativa, like, how can we get things out of the way of people rather than add more things and try to see if that helps people. This is an apocryphal story. It's probably not true. Michelangelo was asked how did he carve David, and he apparently said the sculpture was already complete within the block. He just took away everything that was not David. He just removed whatever was not David. That is the idea of making progress via negativa. How do we remove things out of our way? How do we eliminate waste rather than add processes? I'm going to take you all the way back to 2005. There was a company that I worked at where we had cross-functional teams of 6 to 10 people, all responsible for functional areas. We were doing Scrum at the time. Obviously, that was the big thing to do at that time. So this is almost 20 years ago. Wow, I just realized how old the story is. Very soon after that, we started seeing all these dependencies show up amongst all these small teams. We grew really fast. We went to 10 to 30 teams very quickly, and none of this stuff existed back then. None of the scaling frameworks existed back then. So we had to come up with our own way to scale, and we did a bunch of things that were essentially removing things. We removed the boundaries between teams. We actually combined teams. From teams of 6 to 10 people, we went to teams of 10 to 30 people that were responsible for product domains. That removed a bunch of dependencies, and those teams had the ability to self-organize around stuff. Over time, we were doing Scrum, and we realized a bunch of things in Scrum were not working in our context. Stop doing that. We were doing sprint planning, and we realized we were working in a payroll system. So anytime payroll is down, you can't just sit around and say, hey, no, wait. We're in the middle of a sprint. We have a plan. We can't fix your payroll. We had to actually, or the government changed laws. We couldn't say, oh no, we have a sprint plan. We can't go act on your laws. Uh, we actually threw planning out of the window too. Went to a more just-in-time pull system. Um, Even our daily scrums at that time, there used to be the 3 questions. We threw that out of the way. Actually, that was even before they were removed from the Scrum guide. We threw that out and kind of started focusing on the flow of work. In fact, as we applied those lean principles, we ended up drawing more and more towards flow systems and Kanban. Um, and this is a Kanban board for a team of 30 people. These big blue stickies, these big blue index cards, those are the things that are in progress with the team. And you can see there are less than 30 of them over here. This is where we were pulling things from, but actively working on things. These little yellow stickies are the people who are working on it, and at any point of time, a single card could have 3 people working on it. So we went to more of a collaborative place where we were trying to flow things across instead of trying to do a whole bunch of planning upfront. That helped us quite a bit in terms of those interrupts and in terms of actually getting flow across the system as well.
So can I ask you a question, Prateek? When you
Please,
were there, what was your role?
I initially was a developer on this team, and then I was leading this team as a team lead. I think we used to call ourselves, what did we call ourselves? Lead process engineers is what we called ourselves, because we weren't doing Scrum. We weren't calling ourselves Scrum Masters. It was essentially a Scrum Master role for this flow team. And then after that, I was the manager of this team.
Thanks. I think it's important to know where you can affect change, because anybody can see these, I guess, flow interruptions or these things from any vantage point. And so you were a developer and you started saying, hey, how can we be different?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, there's something very interesting here. I don't know if you see it all the way on the right. There's a grid made of blue tape. That grid was for people. Like our stickies, each yellow sticky there was for a person. The way we limited WIP was, if the stickies are gone, you can't pull anything else in. So if the stickies got to a particular number, you couldn't pull anything else in. And it was an interesting way of limiting WIP for us, which was, I as a developer could not work on more than one thing. So if my sticky was gone, we're not pulling anything else in.
Interesting, because people always ask what's the formula for limiting WIP, and that's interesting. You didn't have a formula. You had just I'm one person.
Yeah.
I can help out with an implementation of something, or I can't. It's not like, oh well, there's 30 people. That means 3 people per issue, which means 10 WIP. That's a nice way of looking at it.
Yeah, and this is a little zoomed out, but if I were able to zoom in here, you'll see some of these cards have 2 stickies on it, some have 1, some have 3. So it wasn't even a direct correlation with the number of people on the team. It was just one person was not supposed to work on more than one thing, and wherever we need to collaborate, we got together to collaborate. But and all of this kind of came from this repeated daily retrospection, essentially. Our stand-up became more of a 10-minute retro of, hey, how are things going? What do we need to change right now so that things keep flowing well? And all these ideas that we have here started coming out of those daily conversations. Oh, maybe we should implement this. Maybe we should implement that. What helps flow of value the most? Wrong space here. Yeah. A problem with Fordlandia was using recipe. But you want to make sure, I hit this a couple of times here. There was a problem with Fordlandia, but the problem was sticking to it. Sure, you can start with a recipe. Might not be a bad place to start, but it's worse if you just stick to it despite everything that your system is telling you, despite everything that's around you. There's a question around WIP. Let me hear that. How do you deal with a situation when there is an external blocker that is being addressed and will be resolved in a couple of days so the person working on it can work on something else in the meanwhile? This is a great question, Slava, and I would so let me repeat that so that everyone can hear it. We have an external blocker that is being addressed and will be resolved in a couple of days. Uh, the person that's working on this thing, should they go pull in something new and potentially increase WIP, or what should they do? There are I won't go too deep into it, but if it's something that's just like a couple of days, my preference always is go help someone else with finishing something. Can you go write tests for something? Can you go help an analyst figure out analysis on something? Can we help with something that's already active? If the answer is no, which rarely is the answer no, then sure, let's go pull something. But pulling something should be the last action in this case. The first action should be who else or what else can I help with that we can help move forward. Uh, Finishing things is always more important than starting things, and that's the perspective we want to take on WIP. Right. Um, I'm going to actually speed through some of this stuff. Yeah, stop starting, start finishing. Exactly. But yeah, the problem here was sticking with it. Um, we started with Scrum, but we didn't stick with it. We changed things as we needed to. If parts of a framework or a recipe do not work in your context, you should absolutely remove or change those things. There's no need to stick with a recipe that does not work for you. And if a framework or recipe falls apart when you change it, that framework might not be agile enough to actually, and it might just be the wrong approach. If changing something breaks it, it's fragile, not agile. We want things where changing things actually improves it. Shout out to Nicholas Taleb's anti-fragile concept. We want approaches where if you change something, it actually gets better, not approaches where you change something and it just breaks. Again, just a quick reminder on that. Agile's not about Agile's about discovering what works best, not about knowing what works best. In your context, change these things as you need to. Don't be a Ford. be more of a Toyota to figure out what works best in your context. Just some references. This is a whole bunch of stuff that I ran through to learn about a bunch of the stuff. If this was interesting, if you want to hear more about things like this, as Fred mentioned earlier, check us out at the Drunk Agile podcast, where Dan Vicanti and I talk about all of these things while drinking whiskey. So it's doubly useful. You get whiskey recommendations as well as some agile stuff. The story in here is also repeated along with some other stories in my book Scaling Simplified. If this interested you, please check out a copy of Scaling Simplified. And last but not least, check us out at prokanban.org. If you're looking for more formal training or even more free resources, ProKanban has a bunch of free resources around flow management and all the stuff. And if you're looking for formal training, you can find those there as well. That is all I had. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Probably open the floor for questions.
Yeah, let's open the floor for questions. We can do Q. Also, I turned on the soundboard reaction, so feel free give Prateek some soundboard reactions to thank him for that great bit of history. You hit the soundboard by hitting S on the keyboard. Excellent. So we do have a question in the chat. Looks like from Maru. Did you look into how Toyota dealt with these cultural issues when it purchased auto factories in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean there's a great documentary on this. I don't remember the name of it, but the Toyota, they teamed up with General Motors and bought a plant in
Kentucky, maybe.
was
I
it
think it,
Kentucky? Yeah, I think so.
or Ohio, Kentucky or Ohio. I think it was somewhere in the
And
Midwest.
and I remember, and they did the plug and play thing, and it went horribly when they were doing the plug and play thing. They tried to do the exact thing that Ford did, and it did not work. I I don't remember how. Yeah, I think it's Who Killed the Electric Car. I think so. I think that's what it was. And then they turned it. As far as I remember, they I think at the end of the documentary they started to turn it around, but it was one of those things where they tried to do the plug and play and it didn't work either.
Excellent. Yeah. It was great to hear you. I loved your talk where your spark your talk about the if your agile transformation isn't agile, then it's not really. And I've been in organizations where they've over architected, over engineered their framework, their approach, and the thing is, my heart, I want to go in and rip it all out, but it's like piece by piece. It's almost like filming a movie. Like if you can remove a scene and you still get the
Yeah.
sense and essence of the movie, then remove the scene. Do you have any stories about removing bits and pieces like of people's processes?
Yeah, I mean it's one of those one of my favorite things we ever did, and developers cover your ears, actually security people cover your ears. There was a process we had. One of my teams had the process of we had the ability to deploy to production, but we could not because when we got to that part in our CI, we had to click this button and that would and enter a password that would let things deploy to production. We didn't know the password. The only the deployment team knew the password. So we had to call the deployment team to say, "Hey, we've got 3 things ready. Can you deploy it for us, please?" We were so concerned about reducing the time it takes for us to deliver value to customers or verify value to customers. We actually stole the password to production. We were able to find out where that was stored. We stole the password to production and started deploying stuff ourselves as soon as it was done. Um, I'm not saying do that. I'm not saying do that. But what I am saying is it's okay to think outside of the box when you're trying to improve these things. Yes, rules are made for a reason, but if you can actually deliver value faster, those rules are meant to be broken.
Absolutely, that's a great great story, and I'll add that one into my tool belt of things that can happen. Yeah, I
But
definitely love going through and I think recently I enabled a team to delete their own issues in Jira because it's like it was walled behind somebody. I just said, "Hey, I'm trusting you. If you delete it, it's gone. So be careful." But I don't want to be the police of deleting things.
yeah, Maru, you're absolutely right. They should actually thank us. They were storing their passwords in plain text, and if you're any developer worth your salt, someone storing passwords in plain text, you'll probably get it.
Any other questions or observations? You got Prateek here. All right, Mark, you got a comment.
Yeah. So first of all, Pratik, it's nice to meet you finally. I've been listening to the Drunk Agile podcast and really been enjoying that. We don't quite exactly have the same taste for Scotch, but that's okay. There's a lot of things I appreciate the insight that you gave us today, and there's a lot of things that resonated with me, like including like don't waterfall your agile transformation. Start small and learn and grow from there. Um, for me, it's always interesting to see how widely adopted Scrum was as a framework, and almost nobody, ever questioned it. And despite the fact that some of the principles aren't necessarily that rigorous, and meanwhile, there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily view SAFe as a good framework, despite the fact that it is strongly based on some very rigorous principles and when you bring in experts who know the same framework, they can actually customize it, and people know from the get-go that you don't apply it
Hmm.
verbatim. Otherwise, you'll end up, like you said, in failed transformations, where a lot of companies have tried this without any expert help. So just to say that, yes, there's a lot of debate out there, a lot of different competing frameworks, um, but it's not necessarily all bad.
Yeah, I think this is I, the crux of the matter for me is when frameworks are when people learn about frameworks, they think of them as this is the way to do it.
Yeah.
Here it is. This is the way to do it. And unfortunately, not unfortunate. Well, yeah, unfortunately, it's very hard to get past. Hey, I'm applying these things right now. I'm not done with it yet. To what you're saying, which is, can I have a better understanding of why I'm trying to do this?
Hmm.
People want a recipe, and people love a recipe,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the reasons why. And I don't mean to
Yeah.
I don't mean to bash stuff too much, but I think that's one of the reasons why Scrum was successful. Scrum was so successful because it was a recipe that was easy to follow, and it gave people benefit. People actually benefited from following that recipe over what they were doing. But I don't think people ever got to the point of, hey, how do we do even better than this? What is the stuff we can take out of this that we can do even better?
Yeah, yeah. So some people figured it out, others
Yeah.
didn't, right? So
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Anyone else have any comments or questions for Prateek, whether about this or about Kanban? Kanban's a system, not a framework, right?
Strategy. Yeah,
Strategy. Damn it. Ugh.
that's
All
all
right.
good. Potato, tomato.
All right. Doesn't sound like it. So, once again, I want to thank you, Prateek, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us here at the Virtually Agile meetup. And let me go through a couple of slides. But we couldn't be here without our sponsors. Butter, like you're here today. You can get a free 7-day trial, 30% off your first 3 months subscription. Butter is a great platform for collaboration that integrates with many tools seamlessly with Miro, which is amazing for me. Agile Testing Day is coming up in November in Potsdam. This is 2023, but it's also coming up again in 2024. I was there virtually last year. I hope to be there in person this year. And Chris, he's a trainer for Scrum Mastery Pathway, so you can reach out to him. It's a great thing where it's just not a 2-day class and then you're a master, but actually a 6-month journey that helps you out along your way. So you can reach out to Chris Stone to start on your journey for that. And with that, once again, I want to thank you, Prateek, for sharing your knowledge and your time. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks for having me, guys.